Shalom. Today's daf yomi is Zevachim daf Chavchas Zevachim 28. Today's daf is dedicated for Shemir for Chaylim, and Tzal for the Shvuyim and Yeshua for Am Yisrael, and the Seis Tzara. And we are on the bottom of Chav Zayin on the base at the Mishnah. It says the Mishnah, the laws of Pigol, which is if you do one of the four essential aspects of the Avodah with the intent to do one of the achilas, the eatings of the korban beyond the proper time, i.e. the sprinkling of the blood, or the eating of the meat, or the offering of the limbs on the altar. So that's hashochet es zevach. Somebody slaughters a korban, mazruk dama b'chutz, to sprinkle the blood, with the intent of doing chutzim komo, to sprinkle the blood outside of the courtyard of the temple, or miktzas dama b'chutz, or a portion of the blood outside, or hakteri mura b'chutz, or to burn its limbs outside, or miktzas mura b'chutz, a portion of limbs outside, or le'echol besar b'chutz, or to eat its meat outside, or kazayis mi besar b'chutz, or an olive-sized portion of its flesh outside, or le'echol kazayis mi or ha'alya b'chutz, or to eat a kazayis of the skin of the tail outside the temple, puzzle. In all these cases, it's disqualified, the aim bill kares. In all those cases where it's chutzlam komo, it's disqualified, but there's no kares. But lizrok damo lamachar, but to do chutzlas nano beyond the proper time, i.e. to sprinkle the blood the next day, or miktas damo lamachar, or a portion of the blood the next day, or lacter in murav lamachar, or to bring its limbs the next day, miktas murav lamachar, or to do a portion the next day, lechol besar lamachar, to eat its meat the next day, or kazayis me besar lamachar, or an olive-sized portion of its meat the next day, or lechol kazayis me or alya lamachar. In all these cases, we're going to say it's pigol, and therefore chayav and alav kares. Then, even if you eat it in its proper time, you're going to get kares under those circumstances. Meaning, if you have the wrong intent, then even though you do it properly, you eat it properly, or you do one of the achilas properly, you're going to get kares. So then the Gemara says, we see from here, Savrua, the assumption of the Gemara is or alya, the skin of the ram. It must be ka'alya dami, must be like the ram itself. The skin of the sheep's tail must be like the meat itself. And Rashi says what this means. On top of even when it comes to burning, that you would bring that you would have to offer the meat of the tail on the altar, the meat of the sheep. So too you have to offer the skin. Rashi says, I feel in Aftara, b'shalmei kavais. We're talking about the shlamim of a sheep, shalia, so kreva, that the tail of the sheep is brought up on the altar, namia or carved. So the skin of the tail is also brought. So just like with respect to eating, it's considered meat, like because we said in our Mishnah that the ora alya b'chutz is that you're eating the skin of the alya. When in your mitzvahs haktaras, so too with the mitzvah of offering it, it's also considered meat. And our Mishnah says that chishachet shlamim le'echol ora alya b'chutz l'machar havi machshava. So, and our Mishnah said that if you slaughter the shlamim with the intent to eat the skin of the tail outside of the Beis Hamikdash, or outside of the Azara, or the next day, that's considered a machshava. So we see from here that that's considered to be a machshava about achila. But even though you're going from achilas mizbeach adam, you're transferring it from the altar to the man. These are two different types of eatings. So the Gemara says, but why? On the top of 28a, but typically speaking, the altar eats the tail of the sheep, and now you're saying that if you have a machshava for a human to eat it, it's going to be considered problematic. So Gemara says yes, because Hamani Rabbi Eliezer, this is the position of Rabbi Eliezer, who says that even though the Amar Mechazra me'achilas mizbeach achilas adam, even though you're going from something that typically the altar eats, i.e. the skin of the tail of the sheep, to a human being eat it, it's still considered to be two achilas, and chutzla makomo applies. Me'achilas adam le'achilas mizbeach. The Rabbi Eliezer is in the position that that's considered a machshava, the Tanan, and we learned this in the Mishnah on Daf Amud Hey. Shochet es zevach echol davar she'ein darko echol. If you slaughter the offering to eat something that you don't typically eat, or lahakir davar she'ein darko lahakir, or to burn something that you don't typically burn, kosher. Rebbe Eliezer posel. Rebbe Eliezer says it's disqualified, and so therefore Rebbe Eliezer says you are mechashem me'achilas mizbeach achilas adam. You go from the altar. It's considered machshava from the altar to a human being. Nor says, wait, you want to say that this first clause, that this part of the Mishnah follows Rebbe Eliezer, but Mayu came like Rebbe Eliezer, but Ema Seifa. But what's the next clause? It's that clause, meaning the Mishnah on Daf Chav Tesavim says, so this is the general rule. Whoever slaughters or does one of these avodas, makabel, halacha, and zrika to eat something that you typically eat, or to offer something you typically offer, which implies davar shedarko echol in, shein darko echol lo. And it only applies if the malshava is about something that it's typically done. Also, Rabbanan, you're saying that's found in the position of the Rabbanan. You mean to say Reisha Rebbe Eliezer or Sefer Rabbanan, that the first clause is Rebbe Eliezer, who says Mechaz Mizbeach V'Achilas Adam, and the next clause of the Mishnah is the Rabbanan. Do you really mean to say that? Amrali in. So that's Shmuel's approach. Shmuel's approach is that yes, the first clause of the Mishnah is Rebbe Eliezer, who says you're Mechashev. The next clause is the Rabbanan. Rav Huna gives a second answer. He says, or al yolavka al yadam. He says, no, the skin of the sheep is not like the sheep itself. And so therefore, he's saying, or al yolavka al yadam, meaning to say you can't offer the skin of the sheep as an offering, because the pasuk, meaning to say that you're not allowed to offer that skin. And so therefore you have no problem, because you simply can't offer the skin on the offering. Amarav, my time at Rav Huna. Why does Rav Huna say that? It says chalbo al yabo or al yab. The chelav of the tail is brought, but not the skin of the tail. And so if that's the case, why does our Mishnah say that if you're eating the tail chutzim komo, you're going to be liable? So he says, if you're eating the skin of the tail, you're liable. Why? Because what are we talking about here? The aliyah shakti. We're not talking about the offering of the tail of the sheep. We're offering the tail of, we're talking about the tail of a goat. And so therefore, Rav Huna's, now we have a third answer. Rav Chisda says, Rav Chisda says, actually, the skin of the tail is really like the tail itself, meaning to say that it goes up on the altar. And why in this case is it not going up on the altar? But so we're talking about the skin of the tail of a goat, and that doesn't go on the altar. Only the skin of the tail of the sheep goes up on the altar. And so now the Gemara says, okay, Kishmuel lo Amri. So Rav Huna and Rav Chisda don't want to follow the position of Shmuel because Reisha Rebbe Eliezer ever say for Rabbanan Mikme. They don't want to establish that they don't like this approach of saying the first clause of Rebbe Eliezer, second clause of Rabbanan. Rav Huna lo Amri, they don't want to adopt the position of Rav Huna because, or Alya ka Alya Dami, because they say Kamashmo, because they say it's really the implication is that the skin of the tail is like the tail itself and it goes up on the altar. And Rav Chisda, my time in Army, why does Rav Huna and Shmuel not want to follow like the position of Rav Chisda? Because my Kamashmo, because then why does the Mishnah have to tell us that if you eat the skin of the tail, you're chayiv, or alya ka'alya dami? Is it to say that the skin of the tail is like the tail? Tanina, we learned that already in the Mishnah Chulin. Ne'ushara saying kibisaran, the tails are like the meat. Or tachas alya, the skin by the tail. So therefore, we wouldn't need to repeat it. V'Rav Chisda, it's Rav Chisda says it's needed. Why? You might have thought with respect to the Tuma, the skin is like the tail, the rachach, but it's soft. I mean, it's if it combines the vachacha. But here, with respect to eating it, ema l'mashcha, l'gdua, k'derech shemalachim ochem. Maybe only you have to eat the meat like the kings eat. V'lo avidi malachim da'achli. And kings don't typically eat the skin of the tail of the goat. So therefore, we need the Mishnah to tell us that the skin of the tail of the goat is like the meat itself. Because hachi ema lo kamash. So the Gemara says, Meisivei. So the Gemara says, let's argue against this opinion of Rav Chisda. Remember, Rav Chisda says that the skin of the tail of the goat is going to be considered like the meat of the tail. Meisivei hashochet ha'olah. Somebody slaughters the olah. Haktir kizayis may or somebody slaughters the olah in order to bring an outside offering of the skin shetachas aliyah putzun komo. If somebody slaughters the olah to bring an outside offering of the or shetachas aliyah putzun komo. Also the imbo kares. So that's going to be disqualified, and he has no kares. Chutzut mano pickle b'chayav and olav kares. And if it's chutzut mano, it gets kares. Whereas Elazar ben Yehuda ish avelim omer mishum Rabbi Yaakov v'chein Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda ish kvar ikus omer mishum Rabbi Shimon. So he says echad or beis aparasos be'emadaka, whether it's the skin of the hooves, echad or harosh, or the skin of the head shel egel harach of a soft calf, echad or shetachas aliyah, or the skin underneath the tail, kol shemenu, and all its fat. The kol shemanu chachamim gabe, not kol shemenu, kol shemanu chachamim gabe tuma, and anything that the sages listed with respect to tuma, ve'elu or and all of these cases, the skin is like the meat in all these cases. So ve'elu or saying in all those cases where their skin was considered to be like their meat. And what is this coming to include? Well, havi or shalbeis aposhes, to include the skin around the genitalia, and chutzlim komo. In all these cases, if they do it outside their place, also the imbo kares, it's disqualified without kares. Chutzlim not if they do it with the wrong intent of the time, pigol v'chayav and all of kares. In all these cases, pigol and liable for kares. Now, in this case, the Brisa talks about an olah. It says an olah in about zevachlo, meaning to say we talk about the tail of the aliyah, the skin of the aliyah, and we say with the wrong intent, you get it's an olah in, but not a zevach. So other sacrifices it doesn't apply. So how would Rav Huna understand it? He would say, Hainu de Katani Oah. Rav Huna, who says that it's not like the tail, the skin is not like the tail. That's what it says in Oah. And Oah it is, but not with respect to everything else. Elo Rav Chisda, but according to Rav Chisda, who says that it's like the tail, the skin is like the tail. Why does it say it doesn't apply to other karbonos? Ma'ir Tani Oah was Nizevach, it should list all the karbonos. So Gemara says, I'm Rav Chisda, Ibai same of the Aliyah Shamti. Well, maybe this is not talking about a sheep, it's talking about a goat. Ibai same of Tani Zevach, or change the text of the Brisa to say any carbon, meaning not an Oah, but any carbon. Also the Ambo Kares. So it says in our Mishnah that in all these cases, if you have chutzum komo, it's disqualified, but you don't get kares. But not immediately. What's the source for this idea? So Amar Shmuel, Trey Kraiksivi. There are two psukim. And what are these two psukim? One of these psukim is in Parashat Tzav, and the other is in Parashat Kedoshim. The one in Parashat Tzav is considered the longer pasuk. So Mahi, what is the two psukim? So Amar Rava, that the pasuk says, in the first pasuk, it says, ואם יכול יאכל מבשר זבח שלמה ביום השלישי לא ירצה מקריב עשו לא יחשב או פיגול יהיה. הנפש האוכל ממנו עוונה תישא. So that's the pasuk, that's the full pasuk. So Amar Rabba, so it says, ביום השלישי זהו חוץ לזמנו. That refers to beyond the proper time, which is what we call pigul. But then when it says the word pigul in the pasuk, zeu chutz l'mtomo, that refers to beyond the proper place, which is disqualified by no kares. And the one who eats from it, from one of these things is kares. That tells if you're beyond the proper time, you get kares. Beyond the proper place is disqualified. The ema, so the Gemara says, maybe when it says the soul that eats from it is beyond the proper place. Maybe the one who gets kares is beyond the proper place, not beyond the proper time. Gemara says, no, mistabra chutzlas mano on it. It makes sense that chutzlas mano is worse, that beyond the time is worse. The pasuk because that's what it starts with. Gemara says, adarabba chutzum komo adif, just the opposite. Beyond the proper place is worse. They're samachai because they're right next to each other in the pasuk. Now Amar Bai, so a different possibility. Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi Amar Rav. Now, typically speaking, why would he be quoting Rav when he comes from Eretz Yisrael? So there's a big discussion about the Girsa, but he says Samach Adatani Tana. He says, let's rely upon the following brayso. Kishomer Shlishi b'Parashas Kedoshim Tiyu. When it says Shlishi in Parashas Kedoshim, which is highly unusual that our Gemara will refer to a parasha of Kedoshim. Usually we just cite a passage, but here it's saying the parasha, the name of the parasha. When it says the same pasuk there, not the same, but a similar pasuk, but it also says the word Shlishi. It says, so when it repeats it, it doesn't have to say it. It already said it in Parashat Tzav. So we already know that about the din of beyond the proper time. So apply to beyond the place. And so therefore, the pasuk in Parashat Tzav refers to kares, which is chutzlas mano, and in Parashat Kedoshim it refers to chutzlas komo. And even though the very next pasuk in Kedoshim doesn't mention kares, it says v'ochav avona yisa u'miyute chutzlas komo. That one, whoever eats it, gets kares, to exclude chutzlas komo. Maybe that's chutzum komo, not chutzum komo. Or miyute noser mikares. It's telling us noser doesn't get kares. And Gemara says no. Mistaber noser havele look mikares. It's more logical to say that noser, that noser is referring to kares. So migmar avon chutzum mano. To say the comparison of avon means beyond the proper place. The damele b'zav, because they have the two similarities in that they both have zav. Zav is zman, and noser and chutzlas mano both are beyond the proper time. And baman and also noser and chutzlas mano both apply outside of the base of mikdash on the bamos. The Gemara says adarab, just the opposite. Chutzum komo haveleluk maybe kares. Just the opposite. Beyond the proper place is what they should say is kares, because the migmar avon chutzlas mano, and say that avon is the damile of mikdash, meaning to say if you could say chutzum komo has kares, and avon applies to chutzlas mano, the damile of mikdash, because they're similar in mikdash. What's mikdash here? So here we say that it applies to the mem is machshava, kuf is kitzas, and the dawat is dam, and shlishi is on the third day. That's how Rashi explains it. Elamar Rabbi Yochanan, Tani Zabdi Bar Levi, Asya Kodesh Kodesh. We make Xera Shava from Kodesh Kodesh from Noser. Ksiv Hacha, it says in Parashas Kedoshim, as Kodesh Hashem Chilel V'nech Rasach. Ksiv Hasam, and it says the Seraftas and Nosar Ba'esh. Ma'al on Noser, just like there refers to Noser, Avkan, Noser. Also here Noser. Mia Rachman Agabe Noser. And the Torah says by Noser V'achav Avona Yisa. Umiyute Chutzum Kol B'Kares. Tell us that Chutzum Kol you don't get Kares. Gemara says, my chazes to kar richa b'chutzlas mano. Why do we say that the first pasuk is referring to chutzlas mano? U'shlishi the parashas koshim to you chutzlam komo, whereas the one in parashas koshim refers to chutzlam komo. Epochana say it's the opposite. Gemara says, no, we don't want to say that. Mistabra aricha b'chutzlas mano. It's more logical to say that the longer pasuk refers to chutzlas mano. Why? The gamar avon minoser, because we learn it out by comparing avon from noser. The damle bezav. Verses are just the opposite. We should say the longer one is b'chutzlam komo. Shlishi the kachim tiyu b'chutzlas mano. Gemara says no. Mishum the damle. and so and some people come in my lane, so therefore maybe we should just basically be reading it the opposite direction. And so the Gemara is basically saying that we don't have a proof yet for how we know that which pasuk that Chutz L'Zmano is kares and Chutz L'Komo is possible but not kares. Stop here, Baruch Hashem.